Well, joining me now is Tim Alberta, national political reporter for Politico Magazine. Okay, Tim, can you just break this down? When we're talking about immunity, what exactly does this mean, and what is a shield, could potentially shield him from?
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, it certainly could shield Michael Flynn from any sort of prosecution related to any activity he may have had, not only with the Russian government, but with other foreign governments. And of course, we've seen reports in recent weeks to that effect. And I think that the fact that Michael Flynn has come forward now and sort of proposed this idea of immunity in exchange for his testimony speaks to the fact that the reports we've seen over the last several weeks as far as the foreign entanglements that not only he has had, but that other former high-ranking members of the Trump campaign staff also may have had, including Paul Manafort, of course, his former campaign chairman. I think it all speaks to the fact that this is probably not a witch hunt, that there's probably several layers of this that have yet to be fully dived into by not only the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, which are conducting their own respective investigations, but also the Justice Department. I think that you don't come forward proposing this idea of immunity unless you're pretty convinced that they could find something else further down the line.
Tim, I want to play for you what Mike Flynn says on immunity. This is from the campaign trail.
5 people around her have been given immunity, to include her former chief of staff. When you are given immunity, that means that you've probably committed a crime. Yes, that's right. Lock her up.
So, Tim, what kind of damage do you think his own words will do in his situation here?
Well, it remains to be seen, but there's certainly no shortage of irony in the entire situation. Of course, in that second clip that you played, that was during General Flynn's speech to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, and in that speech he also rather famously remarked that if he did 1/10 of what Hillary Clinton did, that he would be thrown in jail, and rightfully so. And I think that at this point it's pretty clear that General Flynn probably did do at least 1/10 of what Hillary Clinton did. That's the reason he is now seeking immunity, and the fact that he did make those remarks about, if you're seeking immunity, then you probably did something wrong. I think that, there's probably a pretty widespread recognition within the Trump White House, within the Trump administration, and frankly, probably within the Trump inner circle, that General Flynn's words continue to ring true, and that is in spite of the president's tweet this morning that this is a witch hunt. I think talking to people close to the president, I think they all realize this is not a witch hunt, and the fact that General Flynn no longer works in the White House as the National Security Advisor also speaks to that fact.
I want to play for you. We're getting some reaction on Capitol Hill about this potential immunity deal. The House Oversight Committee chairman weighed in on this. Let's play a little bit of that sound.
I don't think Congress should give him immunity. If there's an open investigation by the FBI, that should not happen. I also don't believe that the president should be weighing in on this. They're the ones that actually would prosecute something. I was very critical of President Obama, who weighed in on the IRS scandal before we had all the facts. And I don't think Donald Trump should be weighing in on this at this point.
That was Chaffetz there. What do you make of the fact that there's a Republican saying that Flynn should not get immunity, but also saying that the president shouldn't weigh in? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that Republicans on the Hill obviously have to be very careful here. I think that we've already seen some partisan cheerleading and some sort of, I think it's difficult for senior Republicans on Capitol Hill in a situation like this, where you don't want to create any sort of unnecessary distance or antagonistic approach towards the White House and towards the president of your own party. But you also, of course, have to retain some sort of, there needs to be a muscular legislative check on the executive when there is an investigation of this magnitude, of this kind of reach. We really haven't seen anything like this in probably 3 or 4 decades. And so I think it's important and incumbent upon members of Congress and the Republican Party, especially on the intel committees, to try to separate partisan politics from a nonpartisan investigation. And of course, you've already seen now reports just in the last hour or so that the Senate Intelligence Committee has rejected this offer of immunity, and that the House Intelligence Committee is likely to do the same. So I think that, for as politicized as this has already become, Republicans are wary of politicizing it even further, and I think that probably speaks to the comments you heard from Chairman Chaffetz a short while ago.
And Tim, he can still take the fifth, even if he can't be forced to come and testify, right?
That is correct. He cannot be, and I think that, the likeliest scenario at this point is that they probably do drag him in front of the committees, and he probably does take the fifth unless something changes here.
Okay, and if Flynn is asking for immunity, what do you think this means for others who are being called to testify, including his own, Donald Trump's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was with Flynn during a meeting with the Russian ambassador?
Well, look, I think we've already seen over the course of the president's first 70 days in office, we've seen a little bit of a drip here. It is not getting any better. I think the news earlier this week, of course, that Chairman Nunes was at the White House receiving some of these classified briefings and then briefed the president the next day sort of further fueled this. And now the announcement yesterday from General Flynn that he is seeking immunity, I think, is probably the most stunning revelation thus far. I'm not sure it's the most consequential, but in terms of fueling public perception that there is something wrong here and it's not just a partisan witch hunt, that there is actually something that happened in this campaign at the highest levels, the uppermost echelons of the Trump campaign and of the Trump inner circle. I think that is a serious concern now, not only for Democrats, but for Republicans in Washington. And I think that as Michael Flynn sought this immunity, you could now see other members seek similar treatment. And if that happens, I think that that is going to do further damage, just if not practically and if not tangibly, it could certainly do further damage sort of in the court of public perception. If you have a whole parade of Trump allies, Trump officials, Trump aides, Trump family members potentially seeking immunity on what is, I think rightfully being described as the most important congressional investigation in 30 or 40 years, I think that could potentially be a devastating thing for the Trump presidency so early on, sort of undermining everything else that he wants to do in terms of a domestic legislative agenda.
And speaking of the Trump presidency, Tim, we're also learning that there were 2 White House officials who helped give House Committee Chairman Devin Nunes intelligence reports. If this is in fact true, if this report is true, how do you think this compromises the House Intelligence Committee investigation? We've heard other senators in the Senate side say we think that there should be a separate independent commission here. Are you hearing anything from your sources that could be the direction this is headed?
I think it's probably a little too early to tell, but I don't think there's much of a mystery at this point on Capitol Hill as far as the confidence in the House Intelligence Committee and in its investigation and its ability to do this investigation in sort of a serious, deliberate, nonpartisan, non-ideological way. I think that even in the House leadership, there are sort of questions festering about how they handle this. I mean, I don't know that Speaker Ryan is in a position to sort of unilaterally remove Chairman Nunes from the position he is in, or certainly to sort of oust him as the chairman of the committee. I don't think that he's going to resign either. So it sort of leaves everybody at a little bit of an impasse. I think there are certainly Republicans and Democrats in Washington right now who are relieved at the sight of the Senate Intelligence Committee sort of conducting its business in a very serious and adult way, for lack of a better term. And I think that, because of that, because you're seeing the Senate Intel Committee sort of working in the way that it is supposed to work, in a nonpartisan way, I think that could sort of keep the calls for an independent investigation at arm's length. But again, I think it's probably too early to tell. The reality of this is that we're probably just scratching the surface. I think we're very early in this process, and I think that we're talking about how 70 days into the Trump presidency, this is sort of an A1 story. I mean, think back to Benghazi. I think that, we all expected that would sort of come and go. It wound up being an A1 story for the better part of a year, and I think that what we're looking at right now is a pretty similar situation.
Yeah, good comparison. Tim Alberta from Politico Magazine. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.